Hi and welcome. My name is Beth Phillips. I'm the publisher of PAHomeschoolLaw.com, a website with information to help you navigate the legal filing requirements of the Pennsylvania homeschool law. The site also includes blog-style articles and other resources to inform, encourage, and inspire parents as they educate their children at home in Pennsylvania. This presentation will help you understand the elements of the affidavit, which is one of the documents that you're required to file with the school district before you commence your home education program. There are plenty of sample affidavits available on the internet, including at PAHomeschoolLaw.com. Your school district may even provide its own affidavit form, which I don't usually suggest using, and I'll explain why later. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel, and I encourage you to use a form that's already available. I still think it's important that you understand what information is required on the affidavit. This will help you avoid errors, omissions, and also avoid agreeing to conditions that aren't required by the law. Okay, for purposes of this presentation, we will assume, number one, that you meet the minimum qualifications to educate a child for whom you have legal custody. Number two, that the child has reached the compulsory age requirement, at least 8 years old. And number three, that you are not a PA certified teacher and able to proceed under the private tutor option of the public school code. Since there are some details related to each of those requirements or issues, I'll cover those in other presentations, or you can go to PAHomeschoolLaw.com to find up-to-date information on each of those issues. So let's get started. The affidavit serves as your official notice to the school district of your intention to educate a child at home. The information that's required on the affidavit can be found at 24 PS section 1327.1 subsection B1. Now is a good time to clarify that you do not need to apply, sign up for, or otherwise obtain the school district's approval or permission to begin homeschooling, as long as you meet the minimum qualifications to homeschool a child in your custody, and as long as you follow the requirements of the law, you have the right to homeschool. In this presentation, I'll discuss the basic elements required in an affidavit. There are 7. And you have to remember that the affidavit has to be notarized before you submit it to the school district. You can download an affidavit form by going to the Forms page of PAHomeschoolLaw.com. The first element required in the affidavit is the name of the supervisor of the home education program. This will be a parent or legal guardian who has custody of the child or children who will be participating in the home education program. This person must have earned a high school diploma or its equivalent and must not have been convicted of any of the crimes listed in subsection E of section 111 of the PA School Code. I'll list those later in the presentation. Although the law does require that the supervisor of the home education program has earned a high school diploma or its equivalent, the law does not require that you attach a copy of the high school diploma. So I just wanted to clarify that. You don't have to include a copy of your diploma when you're submitting your affidavit form. Some families choose to list both parents on the affidavit if they meet the minimum qualifications. This might be a good idea if you expect an extended absence of one parent, or an illness or some other extenuating circumstance requires the absence of one of the parents for the school year. The law only requires one name here, but if you choose to list both custodial parents, or if there are 2 legal guardians with custody, it's perfectly acceptable to list both. The affidavit requires the name and age of each child who will be participating in the home education program. Remember, you should not file an affidavit for children younger than 8 unless they previously attended or were enrolled in a public school. You do not need to list the child's birth date. It's not uncommon to file an affidavit with a school district and receive a call or other request, sometimes from a school nurse or other school administrator, for example, to identify the child's birth date or grade. The law does not require this information, only the name and the age. Also, You should only identify the children on the affidavit who have reached compulsory attendance age. Chances are you have younger children at home, but you are not required to list them on the affidavit until they've reached their 8th birthday. The third requirement is relatively self-explanatory for most people. The affidavit must identify the address and telephone number of the home education program. This would simply be your home address and telephone number. Some families no longer maintain a landline, in which case you should just provide the cell phone number of the supervisor. The purpose of this is to identify or verify the school district of residence. If there's a question about residency, for example, if you own and spend equal amounts of time in 2 or more homes in Pennsylvania, go with where you vote or have a car registered. Just remember, it is your responsibility to comply with the home education law. I want to note here that you do not have to provide other evidence of residency. Many school administrators request home educating families to fill out a registration form or bring you a utility bill or a mortgage statement to prove residency in the district. The affidavit is sufficient evidence of the location of the home education program. You should be aware that children who enroll in public school or charter schools are required to prove residency by like a utility bill or a mortgage statement, and I believe this is the source of the confusion. So let's move on. The fourth requirement on your affidavit is a statement that the required subjects will be offered in the English language, including an outline of proposed educational objectives. The educational objectives should be attached to the affidavit, not included in the content of the affidavit. I advocate listing very general educational objectives, and I'll discuss that in another presentation. You can find sample objectives for elementary and secondary level students at pahomesschoollaw.com. Click on the Homeschool Forms tab, and you'll be taken to a page where you can download the form. The Public School Code defines the immunizations and other health services required for children who reach compulsory school age. The affidavit requires a statement that the children in the home education program have received the required immunizations and health services for their respective grade levels, unless you maintain a religious objection to the required immunizations. There's no need to include the list of immunizations or health services on the affidavit itself. The sample affidavit available on the PDE or Pennsylvania Department of Education website includes that information, and many school districts have copied it and made it available on their own website. The list of immunizations is not required on the affidavit, only the statement that the required health services have been obtained or a religious or medical exemption is asserted. It's for this reason that I don't advise using a school district form or the PDE form, just because I think it's better if everything's on one page, and those tend to get too long and include information that isn't required. I want to take a minute to talk about the religious or moral exemption. Some people argue that even if they don't maintain a religious exemption to the health services or the immunizations, they have a moral or religious objection to government intrusion on medical information. While I do not think the statute would be interpreted that way, if you state a religious or moral objection on the health services required, I don't think the school district will argue with you. I know that plenty of people have asserted this objection, and it is based on their opinion that the school district has no business knowing any medical information, and it's rarely challenged, if at all. I couldn't find any evidence that it ever was challenged. So you're going to have to make that decision yourself, but you should know that if you maintain an objection based on a right of privacy, that I don't think the law would be interpreted this way if challenged. Now, there are plenty of people who attach a list of immunizations and a notification or some other evidence that other health services for the grade level were obtained, and they don't have a problem with privacy or objections, so they just attach it, and that's fine too. It's a personal preference, and it's completely up to you, but you should just understand the law as it relates to religious or health objections or exemptions. So let's look at the affidavit form that's available at the PAHomeschoolLaw.com website. You'll see that the language of the averment related to health services provides for records to be kept at home or on file with a physician and or a religious exemption. It states, quote, that the affidavit is evidence that medical services have been provided and are on file, or a medical or ethical exemption has been claimed. Now, by on file, this can mean at home or with a healthcare provider. According to Section 1303D, the exemption should be provided in writing. I would argue that the affidavit is sufficient notice of an exemption. Most school districts will accept this. If you get a call from a school nurse or other administrator because you didn't attach a list of immunizations or other health records because you would rather keep those private, inform the person that the records are on file, whether at home or with the healthcare provider, or that you maintain a religious or health exemption. If you're unsure of which health services or screenings are required for each grade level, you can find a list of those at PAHomeschoolLaw.com. All right, now for my favorite, covers everything provision. The sixth element of the affidavit is a statement that the home education program, quote, shall comply with the provisions of 24 PS Section 1327.1, and this notarized affidavit is satisfactory evidence thereof, close quote. So I include that phrase right on the affidavit under number 6. So you see how that covers all bases. But this statement does come with a responsibility, since the supervisor of the home education program is asserting that the statements in the affidavit are true. Because the affidavit is notarized, it is a sworn statement under oath and is admissible as evidence in a court of law. So knowingly falsifying this document carries a potential charge of perjury. Now, I don't say that to scare you, and I don't think that it's a likelihood that any matter, homeschooling matter, would ever get that far. But I just want you to take it seriously, and it gives you incentive to really read and understand all the provisions of the homeschool law. Okay, so let's move on to the last and maybe the most important element of the affidavit. The affidavit must include a certification signed by the supervisor that the supervisor, all adults living in the home, and persons having legal custody of a child or children in a home education program have not been convicted of the criminal offenses enumerated in subsection E of Section 111 within 5 years immediately preceding the date of the affidavit. I do not mess around with this. I set this apart from the other averments, and the certification itself is on the affidavit, and the supervisor signs it in front of a notary, and that satisfies this requirement. It's important to note that if you have an older child living in the home who has been convicted of one of the crimes, which I'll list in the next slide, as a juvenile, even if their juvenile record is sealed or expunged on their 18th birthday, this provision may preclude you from educating your younger children at home if that child or person who committed the crime still lives in the home. This is an issue that you'll have to examine closely before you decide to educate your children at home if you're in this situation. Okay, so the crimes listed in Section 111 are as follows: homicide, aggravated assault, stalking, kidnapping, unlawful restraint, rape, statutory sexual assault, indecent assault, aggravated indecent assault, indecent exposure, incest, concealing the death of a child, endangering the welfare of a child, dealing in infant children, prostitution and related offenses, possession of obscene and other sexual materials, corruption of minors, or sexual abuse of children. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to take this certification seriously, and if you have any questions whether an adult living in your home has been convicted of one of the crimes listed within 5 years of the affidavit, it's worth resolving this issue, and you should know that you will not be able to conduct a home education program in the home as long as an adult living in the home has been convicted of one of these crimes. So I hope that's clear. Finally, I want to point out that it is not necessary to list all or each of the crimes on the affidavit form itself. The statement that no adult living in the home has been convicted of the crime is adequate. Okay, so that's all there is to it. So to summarize, let's go over the 7 elements of the affidavit. Number 1, the affidavit needs to include the name of the supervisor of the home education program. Number 2, the name and age of each child. Number 3, the address and phone number of the home education program. Number 4, a statement that the subjects will be offered in the English language. Number 5, evidence of health services or an objection. Number 6, my favorite catch-all provision. And finally, number 7, a certification that no adult living in the home has been convicted of one of the crimes listed in Section 111 of the PA School Code within the past 5 years. So I hope this presentation helped you understand what's required in the affidavit so you do not waste your time including information that's not required by law. Remember, you can get a copy of an affidavit form on pahomesschoollaw.com. Click on the Homeschool Forms tab. Remember to sign your affidavit in front of a notary, and in the first year, it must be filed before commencement of the home education program or within 3 days of the first day of school in your school district, and annually thereafter, no later than August 1st. So finally, there is one statement in the law that actually has to do with objectives that I don't include on the affidavit because I like to keep the affidavit form to 1 page. But it's worth noting on your list of objectives. And my sample objectives has this statement right at the top in bold and italics. And it states, quote, "The required outline of proposed educational objectives shall not be utilized by the superintendent to determine if the home education program is out of compliance with this section and section 1327, close quote." So that tells you that the superintendent can't use your objectives as a checklist, or and also there's no vehicle to reject or disapprove of the home education program. So we'll get into that in another presentation about how to prepare a list of objectives. But I just wanted to mention that this statement does appear in the homeschool provision related to the affidavit. To read more about the legal filing requirements of the Pennsylvania Homeschool Law, you can go to pahomesschoollaw.com. If you prefer to have the information in an easy-to-read, step-by-step guide, you can download the ebook Homeschooling in Pennsylvania: How to Comply with the Law in 8 Easy Steps. It's available on Amazon.com for Kindle, or you can download a PDF version by going to pahomesschoollaw.com and clicking on the ebook tab at the top of the homepage. So I hope this helped you understand the elements of the affidavit. I didn't want to take up too much of your time, but I think it's important that you understand what's required in the affidavit. If you have any questions at all about how to file an affidavit, or still if you have questions about what's required on the affidavit form, please feel free to contact me through pahomesschoollaw.com. You can click on the contact tab and that will give you, I think, my email address, and ask any question you have, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions. So thanks for joining me.